Guild Wars 2 currently has 5 playable races: humans, norn, charr, sylvari, and the asura, where playable races are a staple feature of most MMORPGs. In the last 11 years of Guild Wars 2, there haven't been any races added to the roster. Ignoring any technical, practical, or other limitations that may prevent a new playable race from being added to Guild Wars 2, let's go over what I personally think the 10 best races they could make playable would be. In the number 10 spot are Ogres. This is a lesser race found throughout Tyria, especially in Ascalon. We see Ogres as a staple of most fantasy worlds, and we have interacted with them quite a bit throughout Guild Wars 2, and I think they could provide a good baseline for a new race in the game, where we know some are evil, but some are actually friendly towards the other races of Tyria, where we interact with a few peaceful tribes in core Tyria, and even recruit one for the Pact, which then those Ogres play a pretty big part in the Heart of Thorns expansion. Then we meet another large peaceful tribe in the Path of Fire expansion, where we could see us creating an ogre character that belongs to one of these tribes, where we go into the world, potentially become the leader or member of Dragon's Watch, and begin exploring Tyria. I think ogres could be pretty fun to play as, and would serve as another larger race like the Norn, but looking less like humans. Coming in at the number 9 spot are the Skritt. Now this is the least likely race on this list to be added to Guild Wars 2, but I wanted to bring them up because of some interesting ideas surrounding them, where we know that the Skritt become more intelligent when around other Skritt, where theoretically, a very large group of Skritt would be the smartest creatures on Tyria. But when it comes to playing as a Skritt, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for a lone Skritt to be the hero of Tyria. But I think two things could be done to introduce them to the playable race roster. The first is to play as multiple Skritt at once. Now you probably wouldn't be able to control 3 Skritt units at once, like the Lost Vikings and Heroes of the Storm for example, but it would just be 3 Skritt models running around at the same time as you control them, where there could be a lot of fun opportunities for animations with them interacting with each other, similar to how the player interacts with mounts. But it would be an incredibly unique model and idea to play as 3 Skritt. The second idea, which is more likely to happen if this ever happens, is some sort of asuran experimentation, like an implant that makes a Skritt super smart, or some sort of communicator that transmits information from a much larger hive to them, where you would then be playing as an individual Skritt with the animations and voice acting and whatnot of a Skritt, but you would be hyper intelligent. In the number 8 spot are Centaurs. This is a model of a character that would be really interesting to have and probably incredibly challenging to do. There aren't too many games where you can play as a Centaur, so it would be a pretty unique addition to Guild Wars 2's roster. When a lot of people think of Centaurs, they think of an evil and aggressive faction of enemies that we fight, but if you look at the lore and story of Centaurs across both Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2, there are 2 decent ways that Centaurs could be introduced to the roster. The first is a continuation of the Human and Centaur War, where we see the tribes of the Hrathi, Modnir, and Tamini, where we could see a conclusion of that war, where perhaps the remnants of those 3 tribes become peaceful towards the other races of the world and try to find their place in Tyria. Where a large issue with this would be how humans and the other races would react to working alongside Centaurs, which is a similar storyline to what we see with the humans and charr. A second avenue is to have the playable Centaur be a member of the Maguma tribe, who has decided that they want to leave Maguma and begin exploring the world at large, where they want to participate in world affairs, fight against the forces that seek to threaten Tyria, and do jumping puzzles and stuff. In the number 7 spot, I have the Hylek. This is a really interesting race to think about because of how many options there are to introduce Hylek into the game. When you look at Hylek from the original release of Guild Wars 2, there are a ton of tribes. Many are aggressive towards the other races of Tyria, but many others are peaceful, where we actually work with a lot of Hylek throughout Guild Wars 2. Most people will probably remember the Zinta Holy Grounds and Sparkfly Fen, where this place could evolve a little bit in a future update and serve as the capital city of a playable Hylek race. Or perhaps it could be a small starting zone, like the small area just west of Sparkfly Fen, that could serve as a level 1 to 5 or level 1 to 10 zone for new Hylek characters before they get ushered out to other areas of the world. But with the Heart of Thorns expansion, we were introduced to the Itzel and the Nuhawk, which are 2 incredibly interesting and unique tribes of Hylek, where perhaps we could play as one of them, or there could be an option to choose one of the 3 different types of Hylek, or if we go down that route, we could have a new zone added near the Heart of Maguma, where we can start off our adventures as a Hylek, be it an Itzel, Nuhawk, or another tribe. We can level up a little bit here, and then move on to another part of the world. I think it would be fun to play as a frog person, and there are a lot of opportunities for character customization. If I were to guess, the Itzel would be the most likely tribe for us to play as, since Nuhawk are exceptionally large, and the traditional Hylek might be a bit weird to create armor for. But however the Hylek would be introduced to the game, I think I would enjoy playing as them. In the number 6 spot are Golems. Now this is kind of a catch-all idea, and there are really a lot of different ways this could go. If you look at what is currently in the game, we have a lot of different types of golems, The two biggest ones that come to mind are the Asura Golems and the Jade Mechs, where we could see an advancement and evolution of technology with one of these groups of golems that allow them to become sentient and equal members of society. But there are other types of constructs in the world, like the steam constructs and watch knights, that could be grounds for a new race. But there could also be an entirely new type of golem or construct that could be added to the game, which could become a playable race. There are just a lot of options here. But to pick one and expand on that idea more, let's return to the Asura messing around with things, where we can see the Asura expanding their golem technology to a point that I just mentioned, where the golems could become sentient and equal members of society. With what the golems look like, there's a ton of room for creativity, but we could have something that is more traditionally humanoid but still unique looking from other playable races. And when it comes to customizing those characters, there is a lot of room for what could be done here. Players could select head types, arm types, torso types, leg types, and honestly hundreds of different features like accessories, arrays, and whatnot. That just depends on how much effort ArenaNet would want to put into this type of race. In the number 5 spot are demons. Demons have always been a super cool thing in the Guild Wars franchise. I personally have always wanted to play as a Morganite, but with the Secrets of the Obscure expansion, there is a whole new realm of opportunity. Where we see with the Cryptus and the realm of Nyos, there really is a lot of opportunities for us to see demons become a playable race. When I think about this idea, I am really thinking about Paitha, where she and her two brothers Ceres and Deimos are incredibly unique looking and super cool models of demons, where they all belong to the same race of demon who we interact with as we interact with each of these 3 characters, where I don't think we would ever play as a member of their race given how large they are. But this sets the foundation for other races of demons, where, of course, we see the other Cryptus, and then we see other demons, like the Morganites, where we could be introduced to a brand new race of demons, perhaps a group of demons on Nyos, that want to make peace with the world and people of Tyria. These demons could look similar to demons like Paitha we have met before, or they could be a completely brand new race and model of creatures we have never interacted with before. But I think the core idea here is a race of demons that we can play as, which I think would be super cool. I will highlight one of the issues with playing as demons, and that is interacting with the other people of Tyria, where it could end up being something like the Sylvari, where many people are always fascinated by seeing a member of that race around in the world. But we know that the demons and Astral Ward are closely guarded secrets that most people in Tyria don't know about. But there are grounds in the story, and there's always the potential for this to change. In the number 4 spot are the Largos. This is a race that people have been asking to become playable for a very long time. This is also a race that we know almost nothing about, where there is a lot of room for a huge story in the future. We have interacted with a few Largos in our time playing Guild Wars 2, and they are super cool. Some people speculate that they may be demons from another realm, but all we really know is that they are an incredibly intelligent race of creatures that thrive both in water and on land. Perhaps in the future, we could have an expansion that revolves around the area of the ocean that the Largos comes from, where we could have a set of zones that take place at max level for the expansion, and a second set of zones that allow us to create a brand new Largos character and explore some more peaceful areas of the ocean before leaving for Tyria and returning to the ocean for the expansion. And I think overall, Largos are just super cool. They look incredible, they would probably fit in super well with the other races of Tyria, and I would love to play as one. Coming in at number 3 is a bit of an interesting idea, since it is not a new playable race, but it is to add variance to every single one of the races we currently have. There has been a lot of discussion about the ability for ArenaNet to add new races to Guild Wars 2, which this video isn't really focusing on, but let's dive into that idea a bit. Where if ArenaNet wants to add more options for playable races and character customization in the future without adding a new playable race outright, what can they do? Well, they could add variants to each of the existing races. And when we look at the options for what could happen here, there really are a lot of ideas. Let's talk about a few that I came up with. When you look at humans, people have always wanted the opportunity to play as a member of one of the other human nations, where with character customization, we can kinda do that, but mechanically, we always start off in Shaymore. Well, they could add the option to create a human character that starts off in Alona or Cantha. Additionally, they could introduce undead variants of humans that we could play as, where we see that the remnants of the Awakened, led by Ambassador Sienna, have cemented themselves as a group of people who wish to have a place in the world, where Sienna herself is a human that became awakened, and we could have the options to customize a human character to be an awakened human. Looking at the Norn, we could see the options for a permanent animal form, where you can choose to always be in bear, wolf, raven, or snow leopard form, but instead of having the skills that come with the respective elite skills, we have our normal skills, where this allows people to play as a humanoid animal while still doing their normal stuff, where there could be toggles for each of the 4 forms, where a Norn player can decide to play as a normal Norn, but perhaps they want to run around a wolf form for a while before switching to bear form, and then back to a normal Norn. Looking at sylvari, we could see a lot of racial variants added. We could see sylvari from another tree, similar to our speculation about Malik that we met in the personal story, become a playable sylvari race, where perhaps it could have a slightly different model compared to normal sylvari. Additionally, we could see other opportunities for plant-based races, such as the Wardens of the Echovault Forest, to become playable under the banner of the sylvari. With the charr, the only big idea I had with them was to be able to play as a member of the Flame Legion, where with the personal story, we were able to select that our charr is a member of the Ash, Iron, or Blood Legion, where with how the Flame Legion are becoming a peaceful, prominent, and equal member of charr society, we could now have a character that is a member of that legion. And with the asura, we could see asura from another Rata or a group of survivors that were left underground in the Depths of Tyria. We saw that Zin went and created Rata Novus, which led to some other locations being created as well. We could discover another group of asura that settled somewhere else in the world that we could play as, or with Primordus being defeated, we could discover a group of asura that still live underground that we can play as. And maybe they look a little bit different than other asura, which wouldn't make a whole lot of sense given that the asura haven't really changed genetically in 250 years, but there is obviously the option there. Coming in at number 2 are the Kodan. This has been a long requested race to play as since before Guild Wars 2 released. The Kodan are a really interesting race of bear creatures that come from beyond the far Shiver Peaks, where there has been a lot of speculation about the Kodan's connections with the Norn, but they are a super interesting and mysterious race of people that we already know a ton about, but there's still a lot of room to learn more, where we could see the Kodan introduced to the playable roster if we ever head back to their homelands, or perhaps we could see an existing community of Kodan become playable, where there are a lot of sanctuaries in Tyria that could be used as a starting point for a playable race. I think overall, learning a lot more about the Kodan and their culture would be super cool, and if we don't get to do that through exploring a new playable race, I hope we at least get to explore them and their culture more in the future. But when it comes to actually playing as a Kodan, I think it would be super fun. It would be similar to playing as a Norn, given how their rigging is, which could be a bad thing because it's similar, but it could also be a good thing because how it might make the race easier to implement. But players can already kind of play as a Kodan using a special combat tonic that allows you to run around and fight as a preset Kodan model, which I think is super fun, and I know a lot of people like to use that tonic, but it could be expanded to a completely brand new race with special voice acting, armor, and so on. I just think about how fun it would be to have 3 or 4 or more brand new zones located in the Shiver Peaks, where you begin your adventures as a young Kodan, exploring the mountains and overcoming challenges, where you grow as your character and head out into the world at large. Similar to the 5 different races you see with the original release of Guild Wars 2, but a completely brand new experience as a Kodan. And now for the number 1 spot. For the race that I personally would love to see become playable in Guild Wars 2, where if only one playable race could be added to the game, I would want it to be this one, and it's the Tengu. This is probably the future playable race that gets talked about the most by people in the community because of how cool they are. When we look at the history of Guild Wars 2, the Tengu were a strong candidate for being one of the playable races at launch, but unfortunately they never made the final cut. But we can see that there was a lot of work done with the Tengu, and they were pretty fleshed out at launch. With the Heart of Thorns expansion, we saw the Tengu expanded on a little bit more, and with the End of Dragons expansion, we saw them expanded upon a ton more. And then of course, there have been other updates and stories related to the race throughout the history of Guild Wars 2, like during the Icebreed Saga. But there's just a ton of lore and story from both the original Guild Wars as well as Guild Wars 2 that sets a good foundation for them to become a playable race in the future. People have been waiting for the Dominion of Winds for a very long time, and hopefully we'll get to explore that place in the future, where with a playable Tengu race, we could have a starting zone, a capital city, and perhaps other zones located in the Dominion of Winds, in the areas in the Sea of Sorrows surrounding the Dominion of Winds, in Cantha, or really in any number of different areas across Tyria. And while I would love to explore those areas of the world, I would really just love to play as a Tengu. They are super cool and have been one of my favorite races in Guild Wars 2 since I first started playing through the game. Caledon Forest is one of my favorite zones in the entire game, and the inclusion of the wall to the Dominion of Winds, as well as the Tengu presence in the map, really helps make the map as special as it is. I love locations like the Honto Trading Post and the Tengu around there. I love the Tengu we got to meet in Cantha. I loved, however controversial these missions were, the Dragon Response mission where we interacted with the Tengu. I think the Tengu would be super fun to run around and play as. I want to explore more of Tengu culture, and I just really love the Tengu, and I really hope they become a playable race one day. And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed. There has been a lot of discussion about whether or not playable races can be added to Guild Wars 2, but I really wanted to highlight what playable races could be added to the game. I love playing as the 5 races we can play as in Guild Wars 2, and I don't think that new races necessarily have to be added, but I think they would add a ton of flavor to the game, bring in new and returning players, and just allow a new opportunity for character creation and expression. I threw some honorable mentions in the description, but if you have any other ideas or thoughts about what I talked about in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below. I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.